Now, 8 years ago, then Fine Gael leader Enda Kenny announced that the government would hold a referendum to allow citizens living abroad to vote in presidential elections. But since then, nothing. Next election set to take place in November this year, but will still only be open to citizens resident in this state, unlike many other countries. Neale, Richmond, Michael Fitzmaurice are both still with me. Neale, what happened to the promise?
A couple of things, to be quite frank. First thing, COVID hit. We had quite a few referenda in the last number of 8 years. It was in the pipeline, the discussion had been had, primary legislation was being prepared. And then, to be honest, since the general election and the creation of the programme for government, there has been a political decision that we haven't included in the programme for government because I passionately believe in this. Can I just state this? I really think this is a good idea, particularly for the presidential election. I'm very outspoken as a backbencher and as a senator, but I don't want to run a referendum and lose it because you get one shot at it. And we have to make the political decision about whether it's now...
You can go again. We did it twice in Lisbon and Nice. We could do it twice for this.
Changing European treaties is a bit different. You know, ultimately, we had 35 years until we could repeal the Eighth Amendment. That's the sort of seriousness of it. There's lots of other referenda which have been paused. The one on the unified patent court, not the most emotive or glamorous one, but potentially very important. But as the Minister with Diaspora, we're currently reviewing our Diaspora strategy. It expires at the end of this year. And we're going out and we're engaging with the Diaspora in person, online. Our Diaspora has changed greatly in the last 8 years in terms of the traditional viewpoint of Irish America. It's not what it once was. Growing Irish Diaspora in the United Arab Emirates, different profile in Canada and Australia than it was. So we're making sure that it's fit for purpose. We'll conclude that next April. And the decision to have a referendum on this is under constant review.
But can I ask about that idea that, you know, you don't want to run it and lose it? I mean, that's always going to be the case with the referendum. So why particularly so at the moment with this one?
Well, I'd be quite frank. Like, we ran 2 referenda within the last 12 months and we got fairly badly beaten. And we said quite clearly that we need to reflect on this. And the vast majority of the large party political class, exceptions and all that around, backed those referendum, and we completely misread the public mood. Like, there's nothing wrong in saying, you know what, sometimes when we misread the mood, we have to reflect and take back what's the best way to push forward with this to make sure that people actually want us to do this. We had 2 fairly, I would say, generational defining referenda in the last 10 years in terms of marriage equality and repealing the Eighth Amendment, both of which I was in the trenches for and was very happy to support and canvass for. Whether or not we have the public appetite to run any more referenda in the short term, we have to make the decision that there are other things to prioritise. It doesn't mean that they're not going to happen. It doesn't mean that they're completely abandoned or ignored, but we have to make sure we do things at the right time in the right way.
Michael, do you think we should hold the referendum?
First of all, I think we shouldn't be afraid of a referendum because if you should accept the will of the people one way or the other. You should never be afraid to ask the people the question because obviously the people are sovereign. So why should we be afraid to do that, in my opinion? I think we have a referendum coming up. Have we? That was supposed to be held last year. My understanding was that there was one put off last year that we were going to...
The patent course.
The patent one. And I think that it should be a good time if we want to ask the people about our neutrality. And it could be a good time to ask about, giving the vote to our citizens in other countries. The one thing I would say, the one word of caution I would have, is that the only fear I would have about it, and I'd be very much for it, but the one fear I would have is that we'd be heading into an American-style campaign that very wealthy would be able to fight those elections, but a minnow would have trouble because it would take, if you were going canvassing in different countries, be it Australia, be it America, be it all the countries that Neale has talked about, as well as covered in this country, and Northern Ireland, obviously, and the UK. Remember one thing, you'd want a fair budget behind you, and that's where the only fear and the word of caution I would have. I know that there's social media, but you could see it starting off nearly like the States of America, going to all different places that cost fair big bucks, that the minnows that might want to go for it wouldn't have.
The idea then maybe might be that you just start with the north, with the 6 counties at the moment. I think Peadar Tóibín introduced a bill on this front only last week.
Yeah, but the only thing is, I've no problem with the north, but the only thing, it will be thrown back at you then, why give it to one and not give it to the other? In fairness, I don't think we should be afraid of a referendum.
Was the difference between Irish citizens living in Fermanagh compared to
I know
Arkansas,
that,
isn't there?
There is some people in the UK that believe there is people in the UK that actually come home every weekend, that's working over there. I know several guys there and that are working, and they go out and knock on a Monday morning early and they're home Friday night late. They'd miss a referendum if it was on a Friday, but they're as much entitled to vote, in my opinion. But the one thing I would say is we should never be afraid of a referendum, because the people are sovereign. It is their country, and we should respect whatever they say.
Neale, have you a view, and I appreciate the point you make that you're going through this process of engagement with the diaspora, but your own personal view as to where you draw the line?
Oh, no, I'm quite convinced that I draw the line at the presidential election. And this is one thing that I'm also very wary of when this campaign starts. Any of the sort of commentary that was put out in the early stages was, oh no, we couldn't give people the votes in our national parliament or our county council. And I accept that argument, because there is a point of representation with taxation. You need to be resident in the state to live by the decisions of our TDs and our senators and our councillors. The president's different. The president represents the nation at large, and that's why I don't...
Now, some countries do have overseas votes for parliamentary elections. In France, they do. They've got essentially an overseas panel that you can select from.
They do. They have 3 senators and 3 members of the Assemblée Nationale, 3 out of 650. And we would have trialled this before when the late, great Billy Lawless was a senator for the Diaspora. I sat with him in the Senate. In the US, if you want to vote abroad, you have to pay full income tax, right? So you do pay, you do contribute. And I remember people saying it's really unfair that I wasn't able to, vote in certain referendum, even though they lived in Australia for 6 years. And I said, okay, but what about your neighbour in Australia who's also lived there for 6 years, who has a different opinion to you? But yet I'm living in Dublin, Michael's living in Roscommon, East Galway. We have to live with the consequences of the result. But the presidency can be different because they represent, and it was Mary McAleese, I think, as president, who made that Mary Robinson, sorry, made that very symbolic. She represents all 76 million Irish around the world. And that's why I disagree with Peadar Tóibín's bill. You're saying that Irish citizens in Fermanagh, as you put it, are somehow different than Irish citizens in Coventry or in Boston or in Abu Dhabi. It's the same passport. It's the same passport. You're part of the same nation when you're talking about the presidency. Your tax requirements are the same in those jurisdictions to the Republic for presidents. So those are the sort of areas I draw the line in. And these were the product of really exhaustive discussions.
It is different. Living in Fermanagh is different, isn't it? Like you're on the same island. Some of those people, I mean, their kids might be in school in the Republic. They could be working in the Republic. They just happen to live 500 metres on the far side of an imaginary line. That is different from somebody on Bondi Beach just because they have the same passport.
And I'm the son of someone who grew up 500 metres on the Cavan side of that border. So I know what you're saying, and I take your point. But when the presidency has very distinctly been said, and it's been said by presidents like Douglas Hyde said it, Tom F. O'Higgins would have said it as part of his campaign, and very clearly both Mary Robinson and Mary McAleese and the current president, Michael D. Higgins, have said it. They represent the entire Irish people of 76 million people, of all of whom we legally don't differentiate that a passport, you're an Irish citizen or you're an Irish citizen, regardless of where you are.
So it's passport holders abroad, as opposed to, my great-great-granny is from Windgap.
So the decision was made, it was passport holders. So that brings the possible electorate down from 76 million to somewhere in the region of 32 million. And if we look at Canada, who brought in overseas voting, they reckon in the Canadian election that'll happen in the next 3 weeks, about 10% of those abroad will vote.
And what do you say to Michael's point about the cost of campaigning in those areas? It's already an expensive prospect running a presidential campaign as an independent, much more expensive if there's 32 million possible voters and they're spread around the world.
But I think it's remarkable. Peter Casey made a profit in the last presidential election because he got his expenses back and he spent so little on the campaign. We, as a jurisdiction, have really tight electoral law. We've just done our post-election files. It's nothing like the US. There's no billion-dollar campaigns here. It's very tight in terms of the donations that you're able to receive, where you're able to receive those donations, but equally how you're able to spend them and where you're able to spend them. And this is part of the delay. If we're going to have this, it's not just about the referendum. It's making sure that you have the legislative format to ensure that it's watertight, so the process can't be abused. So you can't have money from a different entity, from a different jurisdiction, influencing the election. We've already seen enough outside influences on elections recently.
Michael, would you place a time limit on anybody had they been abroad for a certain amount of time?
No, if you're a passport holder, I'd agree with Neale on that. If you're a passport holder, you're a passport holder. I don't buy into this.
Even somebody who left 40 years ago has never come back since.
Yeah, well, I don't buy into this of my great-great-great granddad in America was I'm an Irish person. I don't buy into that part of it. If you're a passport holder, you're a passport holder, and those are the people that should get the vote.
Neale, would you place a time limit on it?
Well, current law, if you have lived outside the state for more than 18 months, you cannot vote in any election. So that's it. In terms of the presidential election...
But I'm assuming if we were looking at extending the franchise, we'd have a debate and discussion around that aspect of it as well, that 18-month limit.
I would be quite firm, and the proposal originally was that anyone who is a passport holder, whether they were born in Ireland or whether they get it because their mother was Irish, is entitled to vote under this proposal.
It's not going to happen for the upcoming presidential election. Would you have any hope it'd happen for the next one?
It legally can't happen for the upcoming legislation. There isn't the window, which is why there's no solid commitment programme for government to do it immediately, because I would personally, genuinely, I really want this to happen. Like, I do believe in this. I think it's a good thing. And I have said that a load of times. I would have a great aspiration that you would have all Irish citizens voting in the next presidential election.
And can I ask, the fear you have, is it that a referendum campaign would be consumed by the culture wars or something, you know, or is it just, you know, people will use it to kick the government?
No, and people can kick the government every day of the week. They don't need a referendum to do that.
Yeah.
They can click the political establishment, and we've seen that. It's more a fear that it is quite a nuanced debate, and you need to give a nuanced debate time, and you need to make sure that the debate that you're putting forward...
I know, but I started this by saying I think Enda Kenny suggested it 8 years ago. We've had a lot of time.
No, but look what's happened in 8 years when, in terms of the process, when we've talked about, and we've already kicked about a few of the issues now. Who do you allow to vote? What is going to be the spending limits? What is going to be the campaigning term, campaigning terms and conditions? All that has been thrashed out. A lot of it still hasn't been resolved. The primary legislation to allow for this would probably take 18 months to get through the Dáil and the Shannon anyway. So that's on top of, yes, the idea 8 years ago, Diaspora strategy, post-financial crash, this is something that we're going to do. Yeah. And then, obviously, we lost 2 years of the political cycle with COVID, and then we have a backlog of other referenda that need to be involved too.
Kieran, I think we should put the wheels in motion. I think the debate should be ahead. As I say, I would have absolutely no objections to it. I've thrown my few pieces of what I would be cautious about. But I don't think that we should be very wary of putting a vote to the people on this. Once we have everything right in the legislation we prepare. Because there's very little families around this country that has some loved one tonight belonging to them in either England or Australia or one of those countries, or Northern Ireland for that matter. They have someone belonging to them, and I don't think they would deprive their loved one of a vote.
Francis Fitzgerald not running. Are you going to campaign for Mairead McGuinness?
I'll campaign for whoever the duly nominated Fine Gael candidate is.
Okay, yeah,
nice
try. Politician. Anyway, we're going to